Hello, fermented folks. Thank you for tuning in to another week of Fermented Fiction, another month where we feature one of our fellow creative souls out there. Our featured author of the month this month is Dylan West, author of Scribe's Descent, Emulsipation. Is
That's
that how
right.
you pronounce it?
Yeah,
Emulsipation?
absolutely.
And a couple other fantasy, sci-fi, YA stories. I know that Dylan is working on a few other things, and we'll get into some of that today. Thank you for joining us, Dylan. I am Clay Vermolum, host. Travis Vermolum, my brother, is the other host.
Yep.
Dylan, how you doing?
Doing well. And that's how you say your last name? I've been noodling over that ever since I first saw it in print. Like
It is
Vermolm, but you say Vermolum, like another
Vermont,
syllable on the end, right?
sort of.
Yeah,
It's very
Okay.
Dutch.
Okay. All right.
apparently the Dutch like to drop invisible consonants in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is an ongoing struggle in the family for sure.
Yep.
So Dylan, let's get right into it. I was reading your author bio actually for the first time. I've worked my way through your book here, but I hadn't actually read your bio, and I was interested to see that the first thing you actually mentioned is about your faith. I'd expect you to say like you're a scientist or a geologist or something. Um, so I find that really interesting that you emphasize your dedication to writing faith-based books in your very short bio. I love this, especially since you write relatively hard sci-fi. In terms of you focus very much on the actual science. For those of you who don't know the difference between hard and soft sci-fi is kind of like it almost becomes fantasy in space sometimes. It's like the actual science of the world doesn't matter as much. Whereas hard sci-fi, which is what Dylan works on primarily, is he very much explains the science. The science very much is part of the story. In a lot of ways, the science is the story. And I really like that you write that way, Dylan. What challenges do you find writing science-forward narratives with a faith-based intention? Do you find any inherent conflict between science and faith? And if so, how do you address and circumnavigate those things?
I've been getting that question a lot lately. And honestly, I'm always kind of a little bit confused, I guess, or a little surprised, because I really don't see any conflict at all. I think maybe sometimes people get hung up on old Earth versus new Earth, that kind of thing. Bible says literal 6 days of creation. The fossil record, at least as it's presented in geology textbooks, claims that it's millions and or billions and billions of years old. And so, which one's right? Is Genesis 1, chapters 1 and 2 right, or the fossil record right? Like, honestly, I just don't really see a conflict there because there's just so much room for interpretation in
Mm-hmm.
Genesis for either young or old Earth. And honestly, as much as I've studied geology and biology and all these other ologies, um, I see room to go either way with young Earth or old Earth, depending on how you interpret the findings and the assumptions that go into dating and all those things, right? So, like for me, I'm just kind of like, I don't want to get too dogmatic about it.
That's a good answer. Travis is a theology major and got his master's
Oh,
in theology, so
sweet.
you guys could have
Uh,
some good conversations.
oh yeah.
Yes. I mean, I love your response with those different stories of Genesis because I even struggle. Like, I get asked a lot, like, do you think the Bible is literal in every sense of every single word is exactly what is said? And it's like, I don't know how to answer you. Like some of it,
Mm-hmm.
probably, some of it, maybe not. Some of it, we're still arguing about it. It is a
There's
story that's lasted for thousands of years. Like, of course, it's going to have a lot of discourse, just as every religious text is going to, you
there's
know?
parts that are very clearly figurative. Like when Jesus says, "I am the door," I don't think that means he physically has hinges
Yeah.
stapled to the side of his, right? But there are some things
Mm.
in scripture that I think are both literal and figurative. Whereas where Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, you are the light of the world. I think that's literal and figurative, because figurative, like spiritually, we shine light whenever we show our good works. But physically, like literally, we are black body radiation emitters. Like we actually have bioluminescence. I don't want to give away spoilers from my book, but there's some bioluminescence going on in there. And later on, I looked it up. I was like, is this even feasible? And then, yeah, I admit sometimes I start with story and then I backtrack and go, wait a minute, is this legit? Sometimes it goes that way. And then I'm like, seeing these articles that say all humans bioluminesce, it's just at such a faint degree that you have to have very sensitive cameras to see it. I was like, well, that's really cool. And then it made me think of you are the light of the world. I'm like, whoa, not just black body radiation, but actual visible light comes off humans just at tiny, tiny lumens.
A follow-up on that. I'm curious, like, so that's the hard science that like feeds into the story. I get very, very, very like into how narratives like the Bible, like other religious texts, have shaped our society. And I wonder, have you had those realizations of those stories as well while being a writer, of like the importance that narrative plays in the shaping of culture and of world, and of like fiction can be something more than just passing the time, I guess. Does your faith influence that as well?
Oh yeah. Like there's two books. I tell people there are two books that changed my life forever. And this is I'm probably like skipping ahead and answering some of your future questions, but hey, one of them was the Bible when I was 11 years old. The second one was Salamanderstron by Brian Jacques, one of the Redwall books. So
one
you
of the
might
best
be,
ones.
all right. So like the Bible, you're like, okay, that makes sense, right? You became a Christian. Okay, that checks. But Salamanderstron. So the first 13 years of my life, I hated reading. I thought it was boring.